All right. Doing something new here. Um, Looks like my mic is working. Hopefully it is. Like we got the right device on. Hello, hello, hello. All right. Um, so yeah, let me just get right into it. I'm trying something different here. Clearly, by doing this live. I didn't advertise this, so I'm not expecting anyone probably to hop in on here. If anyone happens to maybe just be checking YouTube and noticing that it's there, one of my subscribers, check it out. That would be cool. But hopefully, I'll still be able to preserve this live video. It'll be up on my channel, and folks can check it out later. But what am I doing? Like, right? So, it's been a little bit of time since I updated the channel. Like I said, hopefully the mic is actually getting me pretty good here. But it's been a little bit of time since I updated the channel. Looks like I already got a like from somebody. That's cool. Um, and fall time is really busy for me. It typically is uh, birthdays throughout my family, the holidays with really Halloween, which is a big thing for my family, and Thanksgiving and Christmas. I mean, there are literally, I think, like 5 or 6 birthdays in the mix of all of that. Schools opening, and then work wise this year, especially, it's super busy. So it's becoming increasingly hard for me to find time to really just record and think about, putting out a video and editing, which is usually the big pain point for me. It takes time. It takes time. Obviously, this channel is not my main gig. I'm not a full time, YouTuber or influencer. I'm doing this purely just from my own volition in my spare time if I can find it. I appreciate it. The channel has grown a lot in the last like 4 years. I'm just at almost at 1,000 subscribers, guys. And that's cool. That's a good number for me. I'm not aspiring to get to be somebody out there with 100,000 subscribers and all of this stuff. Again, if I ever did this full time, maybe, but that's not really the goal right now. Now that said, I know that, like I said, there's been a good amount of time lapse between my videos, and I actually have several videos that I recorded. I have a couple of videos that I kind of have in the my editor software right now that I was trying to go through, but again, there's a lot of things happening, and I just wanted to take some time to touch on them and check in with you guys because I probably won't have time to actually, fully do a recording and editing until a lot of this stuff is already passed, right? So let me just check in. I had some time. I'm kind of literally on my lunch break. A lot of you guys should be working or in school. So I see, oh, I got 3 people on here. Let's go. Like I said, I'm not expecting much, but I wanted to just get this out there. So I appreciate you guys, 3 people out there chiming on the chat. Got the chat window open. Maybe it's something that I can start doing if this is easier, faster, better way for me to engage with you guys. Absolutely, let's do that. Let's make that happen. That said, keep the love coming, so liking, subscribing. Like, you guys engaging with me is really the motivation for me to continue with this channel. Frankly, I put out, I think, 3 videos kind of in a short span last time, but I guess now it's been about a couple of months. And yeah, I didn't get that much traction. And it's like, if I got 930 subscribers and I put out a video and in the course of a week, I only got 50 views, 60 views, something like that. That's kind of like, come on, guys, right? And it's this consistent content. And ironically, those 3 videos are, I think, at this point, are still 100% likes, right? So it's not like people are just saying it's trash content necessarily, but if you're subscribing, and I really want you to engage with me is the point. That's what I'm saying. Keep that going. If I see that engagement, people asking for me to put out content, I absolutely will, eke out more time and devote more time to doing that. But it's hard when I'm seeing the level of engagement be fairly low. So I'm doing this for me. I'm going to check in with you guys here. So let's talk about a couple of things. So today is Thursday, November 7th. I see people coming in and out. But this is PlayStation 5 Pro Day, right? So happy PlayStation 5 Pro Day if you're into that sort of thing. I actually have mine on the way. I got my launch unit. It is out for delivery, so it actually may come in the middle of this live stream potentially. So I might have to actually get up and go and get that. We'll see. But PlayStation 5 Pro is here. Now, again, there's a lot of things that could be said about this system. There's been a lot of preview stuff and pre-release stuff. The review embargoes went live yesterday. And then the unboxings was happening earlier in the week. Sony put out a couple things. So, overall, I think it's looking pretty good. The hardware is going to be readily available. It didn't sell out, so it's still out there for people to get it if they really want it. There are supposedly over 50 games that should be patched as of today, launch day, over 50 games. We already know, though, that there are almost 100 games that have been announced or confirmed to be PlayStation 5 Pro enhanced. So, they're not all going to be day one, but over the next few weeks, I mean, they're already up on the PS Store. You can look at the game, see the PS5 Pro label. So I think the number now is literally like a little bit over 90. So that's pretty good, man. That's better support than we saw for the PS4 Pro, by the way. And the obviously the range of improvements depend on the game, depend on the engine, and etc. But besides the actual patch games, PlayStation 5 Pro will also. Sorry, I got a Slack message just now. PlayStation 5 Pro also has a boost mode, right? And in that boost mode, you can get improvements for games that don't have a patch. So they use some level of the hardware to get better performance, better image quality. If you have like a dynamic resolution scaler, that's typically in line with trying to maintain an FPS target, right? Depending on the hardware. PS5 Pro has, more powerful hardware. So in theory, the DRS should be higher, meaning that the resolution should be higher. We're seeing that already happen with some games. Now, one thing to call out here, guys, one of my issues right now, a lot of the reviews that came out yesterday, a lot of games weren't patched yet, right? The system officially is coming out today. So a lot of the patched games are coming out today. So people are looking at games that are not patched and by and large, or again, most of like the older Sony first party stuff or some of the early ones to be patched. Things like The Last of Us Part 1 and 2 and Spider-Man and stuff like that. But today we're going to be seeing a lot more games coming out. No Man's Sky is going to get a lot of traction. That has a nice improvement. Baldur's Gate 3, Diablo 4, Star Wars Outlaws, and Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Just to name a few. Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. There's a lot. Again, there's a lot of good games, cool games. Of course, everybody wants some other games that are missing from the list, but they'll be here soon enough, right? So people, oh my God, PS5, Pro benchmarking. Oh, it's only 30% faster. Oh, it's still not able to run this game and that game at 60 frames per second. In almost every case that I've seen people talking about that, in almost every case, it is for unpatched games. People looked at Elden Ring. Digital Foundry did this analysis of Elden Ring. Elden Ring is not patched, and knowing From Software probably never will be patched. That said, it's still a big improvement, right? If you ran that game in quality mode, unlocked, the frame rate was generally in the 30s, now like 30 to 40. And now it's generally in the 50s, 50 to 60 range. So that's still a big improvement without a patch, right? Just running on the console. One thing people got to realize, man, is that part of the main reason for patching games is to update the SDK version that the game is actually working on. A lot of these older games are working on older SDKs. Now, SDKs, software development kits, for those that don't know, that's more than just PS5 Pro. Obviously, there's a certain SDK, PlayStation SDK, that now supports the PS5 Pro. But these older SDKs are not going to be as optimized. Over time, Sony is updating the SDK that includes performance improvements, that includes optimizations and more efficiency in terms of how a developer can utilize the system. The PS5 Pro adds a lot of stuff under the hood that Sony hasn't even talked about. They talked about the big stuff. It has a bigger GPU. We know that. It has additional ray tracing hardware. We know that. It now has this PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, PSSR, which is an AI upscaler. We know that. And those are all great. But underneath the hood, there's still supposedly a slight CPU and GPU clock increase at the discretion of developers in certain modes. It's not a universal thing, but if the developer wanted to or chose to in a particular game or use case, they can get a 10% boost on the CPU clock or a 10% boost on the GPU clock, right? There are a lot of cache improvements, right? This is really low level stuff, but the GPU has double the L1 and L0 cache that then the PlayStation 5 base has. That matters too, right? A lot, especially for ray tracing applications, right? There's more RAM available to devs, right? So with the latest PS5 Pro, it's at least about 14 and a half. We don't know exactly. We know that the system now has 2 GB of DDR5 RAM, which is not the graphics RAM, not the GDDR5 that the base PS5 has, right? So there's still 16 gigs of GDDR5 graphics RAM, but now there's also an additional 2 gigs of DDR5, which everyone is suspecting is reserved for the OS. The problem is that the base PS5 OS had more than 2 GB reserved. It was actually 3.5 GB reserved, right? So that means that game developers only had about 12.5 GB of the 16 gigabytes available to them. At the very least, having those 2 GB reserved for the OS now means that the game developers could have about 14.5 GB available for games. So that's a nice improvement. Some people are speculating that Sony has optimized the OS that it only fits in the 2 GB footprint, which would be awesome. But I don't know. I'm kind of skeptical on that because, modern OSs, even for game consoles, typically use more than 2 gigs. Just saying. But okay, best case scenario, OS has its separate pool, and all 16 gigs are now available for games. That's pretty significant. That's going from 12.5 gigs to 16 gigs for game developers. Again, we don't know if that's happening, but that's still nice. So there are a lot of improvements that's happening there. My point is that with an unpatched game, there is no guarantee, and in fact, in most cases, you can probably bet that the game will not be able to access all of those improvements to maximize the performance. So that 30%, that's not obviously, we know that the GPU is almost 70%, have more almost 70% more compute. We know that the RAM is almost 30% faster. We know, again, that the caches are over twice the size, right? And there's a lot of improvements. Boost mode doesn't probably access all of that. I'm just saying, this is pump the brakes. Today, patch games are coming out. Let's see what that performance looks like. We're already seeing some great improvements. Recently, stuff like No Man's Sky now has an 8K 30 mode, which is pretty awesome. In a 4K 60 mode, right? That runs pretty smoothly there with an update in settings, with an increase in fidelity across your graphical settings, stuff like that. So that's pretty cool. Baldur's Gate 3 now has twice the pixel count. The quality mode on the base PS5 ran at a native 1440p. Now it runs at a native 4K. But 30 frames per second. But that's still twice the pixel count. But they now have a 1440p mode with 60 FPS that uses Sony's PSSR. PSSR so far is proven to be definitely a good improvement over typical TAA or TAAU and FSR as well. So you get cleaner, more detailed image that looks much more like a 4K image at a locked 60 FPS, whereas the base PS5 is doing that dynamic 1440p, where it goes down to 1080p, again, using, I believe it's FSR or maybe TAU. Either way, the actual upscaling quality is not nearly as good. So that's a significant increase. Again, almost really 2x increase there. So there's going to be a lot of good stories like that. I'm not going to go into the detail because I don't have my system yet. It's coming. But I'm not going to go into the details of the games. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's videos. Digital Foundry did their analysis of, or at least for some games, whatever like that. One thing I do want to point out, though, and that makes me excited about it in general, is that we we can already see that the PS5 Pro is going to be a bigger, more meaningful increase over the base PS5 than what we saw with the PS4 Pro and the PS4. Right now, that's what I'm saying. Now, some people might listen to that and think I'm crazy. Why am I saying that? Again, on paper, the PS4 Pro was a bigger jump. It had a bigger increase in GPU. The specs on paper looked larger. The GPU was like, what, 2.2 times the size of the base PS4. This case, we're only seeing 67%, right, in terms of just GPU size, that kind of stuff. On the paper, the PS4 Pro looked better. And that was cool. I was excited about it. And then it was, of course, unlocking 4K TVs becoming a thing. That's what everyone keeps harping on. Like, well, there was a clear, uh, motivation to get PS4 Pro because it was 4K. And 4K was coming a thing. And that now PS5 doesn't have that. The problem with that is, in practice, the PS4 Pro couldn't do 4K in gaming for the most part, right? Again, even that 2.2 GPU only got you halfway there, right? If the base PS4 was doing 1080p, you needed about 4 times the GPU power to get from 1080p to 4K, right? Sony couldn't deliver that in hardware for an affordable price at the time. They did the best they could. So what did they do? They got 2.2x, which is halfway there. The other half was supposed to be covered by the checkerboard rendering, right? You guys remember that? I see I got some more people on here, y'all. Thanks for joining in. Checkerboard rendering was supposed to be the thing, okay, that was going to take that extra, give you that extra 2x, so to speak, right, to get you up to 4K. So the combination of the GPU increase, 2.2x, plus checkerboard rendering, that's how you were supposed to get the 4K. In practice, the vast majority of PS4 games, in my experience, I would say like over 90% of them, really just wound up being a 2x resolution increase. So it went from 1080p, let's say, to 1440p. And that was it. Like in most cases, you didn't see graphical settings improve. You didn't see performance improve because most PS4 games were CPU bound, which is not the case for the PS5 generation, right? So when you have CPU boundness, that 2.2 GPU boost doesn't do much, which is why Sony made a point to actually boost the CPU clock on the PS4 Pro and gave it a nice healthy 30% bump. Now that's cool, but again, 30% isn't double. A game that's locked at 30 can't now suddenly run at 60, right? So we saw a couple of cases where unlocked frame rate games did run better. They get closer to 60, or in some cases even lock at 60 if they already were running in the 40s, let's say, or something like that. I think one of the best cases for PS4 Pro from my memory was like the Resident Evil 2 remake and 3 remake, right? Those were unlocked and they were generally like 30, 40 FPS and they ran much closer to 60. And, you got a meaningful bump there while having the additional resolution increase as well, right? But in general, and again, I mean, I played a lot. I had a PS4 Pro. I had 2 PS4 Pros actually. And that's how I rolled out my PS4 generation. But I was largely underwhelmed, to be honest with that system. Yes, the UI was native 4K, and there were some simple games that were native 4K. Our Wipeout collection, I remember, and you had some like smaller indie titles that could run at native 4K. A lot of the sports games, if you remember, things like the NBA 2K series and FIFA and stuff like that, they ran at native 4K on PS4 Pro. So it wasn't like the PS4 Pro could not do native 4K. I hate when people say that. I think I already covered that on the channel. If a system can output a native 4K image, it's a 4K system, right? The question is, what are games able to, what are the level games that are able to hit that target? And in practice, it wasn't many on the PS4 Pro. But that was it. Despite all of the talk, that was really it. It was just 1440p, which, in a typical living room, sitting a certain distance, it's not a big deal. 1080p to 1440p, yeah, it's a little sharper, but it's not a big deal. It's not like, wow, this suddenly looks like, something crazy. That was it. So PS5 Pro, to me, it's going to be a much bigger. We are in the early days. We're right at the beginning. It's going to be a bigger deal for sure. We're going to see PSSR is going to be a big deal and a meaningful improvement to image quality over FSR and TAAU, or even something like TSR, which some Unreal games use. And it's going to be optimized because it's built by Sony, which means it's going to be optimized for the actual console. So the performance overhead will get smaller over time. The quality is a machine learning algorithm, so it will get better over time. and that's exciting. But we're already seeing that it's transforming image quality in a number of games, especially again if you have the equipment to take advantage of it. Now, I I do think the PS5 Pro will be a bigger jump, but I just also want to point out the parallel here, right? The PS5 Pro is very, very similar and very much in line with what the PS4 Pro was. Sony has literally taken the same core, kind of tenets and said, okay, these are the things that we want to do to improve on this base system. They're doing it the same way, right? Bigger graphics jump, like just more raw graphics horsepower, a bigger GPU. PS4 Pro, we saw that over 2x. Now we're seeing that again, almost 70%. The reason why it's not as big, again, that's kind of the laws of physics. That's the expense and the cost of manufacturing. That's the how everything is getting bigger, utilizing more heat. That's Moore's law essentially being dead now, and you just can't get the same amount of power increase and transistor size decrease that we used to be able to see. And that's really what that is, right? So 70% is still meaningful though, but it's not the 2.2x we saw in the PS4 Pro. But bigger GPU, check. Some kind of intelligent software solution to increase resolution. PS4 had the checkerboard rendering. Like I said, that was supposed to fill in the other 2x that we needed, right, from the 2x from the GPU bump. Now we have PSSR, a much more sophisticated machine learned AI driven way of doing the same thing, essentially, right? 70% doesn't even get you double, but with PSSR help, we can get double or even in some cases more than double. That's the idea, right? The only difference here, of course, is the CPU. Okay, the CPU on the PS5 Pro is pretty much the same. Sony hasn't even mentioned much of a clock speed. The leaked documents suggest there is a way for developers to access a 10% boost mode. Remains to be confirmed, but let's assume that's the case because everything else pretty much checked out from the leaks. The PS4 Pro saw a bigger increase in the CPU, and people are complaining, well, the CPU is the same, and why are there no jump in CPU? Guys, this is a mid-gen refresh. Sony is not going to change the CPU architecture. That would break compatibility. That would require a lot more testing. That would, this is not a new gen system. That's a lot more expensive and a lot more time consuming for them to do. It just doesn't make sense. And in this case, it's not necessary. People are complaining because of the handful of games that are actually CPU bound. There are, right? I mean, how many games? There are thousands of games on the PS5. There are literally a handful of games that have been like confirmed to be CPU bound on the base PS5. Okay. Meaning, not able to hit its target of 30 or 60 because of CPU boundedness. Gotham Knights was one of them renowned, which again, it wasn't really a hardware issue. That everyone knows that's the software issue. That was the optimization thing. So they could have fixed that. People talking about stuff like Baldur's Gate in the city, stuff like that. Okay. Dragon's Dogma 2. Okay. And again, in the city crowded areas. Again, there are a handful though. The fact of the matter is that the vast majority of games on base PS5 are not CPU bound. They are GPU bound, especially when you talk about ray tracing stuff, right? Which is why Sony smartly focused all of the effort or most of the effort on the GPU. How do we know that most games are not CPU bound on the base PS5? Because almost, like literally, 98% of all games on the base PS5 have a 60 FPS mode, meaning it can run at 60. Right now, it may be CPU bound if you're trying to push up to 120 or something, but that's not most games. Hitting 60 is not a CPU bound issue. Okay, so this has been seen. Every game has a 60 FPS mode. Now, it may not run locked 60, but again, that's usually because of GPU issues, right? And resolution. If your game is CPU bound, changing the resolution wouldn't affect the frame rate. Changing your graphical settings would not affect the frame rate. Okay. Adding something like FSR or DLSS, generally speaking, would not change the frame rate much. That's CPU boundedness, right? The reason why you can turn down the resolution on most games and get 60 FPS implies, by definition, that the game is GPU bound, right? So I'm disgusted. Like the CPU is fine. Now, yes, they're pushing more ray tracing and whatever. And yes, it may come up for the PS5 Pro in terms of pushing to 120. A lot of games could probably get to 120 based on the GPU upgrade. But yeah, there are some games that will be CPU bound, before you get to 120. Okay, right? But again, that's still not going to be the majority of cases. And as we see on the base PS5, that's nowhere near the majority of cases. All right. The other thing about the PS5 Pro that I think is going to be cool is that this now in this generation, things like dynamic resolution scaling, unlocked frame rates, VRR, okay, are real things. Meaning that we're seeing games that are, like PC have unlocked frame rates. So if you give it more hardware, which is what the GPU boost mode is doing, you can push the FPS up. With things like VRR, you don't need to have the fixed perfect line FPS like we typically are used to or expecting, right, on consoles, especially. You don't need that because if you have a VRR TV and it's in the VRR range, it's still gonna feel pretty smooth. Right now in the PS5, the range is 48 to 120. So as long as a game is hitting 48 FPS, it's gonna feel pretty smooth. It doesn't have to be locked. It can be fluctuating between 50 and 80. It can be fluctuating, if you're already above 60 and fluctuating, that's fine, right? So that means that there's going to be more value out of the PS5 Pro because it's going to be able to push a lot of games that were struggling in the 30s. It can probably push it to that VRR range if you have a VRR TV, of course, right? DRS again means that you can get better sharpness even without a patch, which we've already seen. Guys, Digital Foundry pointed out that GT7 hasn't been patched yet, right? But GT7 is already running at native 4K, a locked 120 FPS on the Pro. It's doing that purely just from the GPU boost, right? That's cool. That's awesome, right? It didn't do that on the base PS5. It had a 120 mode. It definitely dropped beneath that at some points, right? But now it's running native 4K, locked 120, right? That's the kind of stuff we can see. So that's cool. It's going to be a bigger jump, man. Like the combination of all of that stuff, the best ABs we've seen from any kind of Pro, honestly, even including the Xbox One X, I would say. Now, Xbox One X was a bigger jump, and I thought that was a more meaningful improvement over the base Xbox One. That was definitely more meaningful than the PS4 Pro. But the best ABs we're seeing are looking at some of the new ray tracing effects that are now enabled on the PS5 Pro. That's, we're seeing that day one. We can see the difference in Alan Wake 2. We can see the difference in Dead Rising Deluxe remaster. We saw Capcom publish some images there. That looks very different. We see what Insomniac is doing, unlocking basically the max PC ray tracing settings on the PS5 Pro, where they couldn't do that, on the base PS5. Stuff like that. We're going to see, we see a lot of ray tracing, like the Capcom games, the Resident Evil games that have ray tracing. Jedi Survivor, we're seeing ray tracing be added to the performance mode on Dragon Age on the Pro, right? We're seeing like these developers already go in on the ray tracing front, which is cool, which is awesome. You do an AB and you can clearly see the difference there. You can clearly see the graphical improvements there. There was no ABs on the PS4 or the PS4 Pro that could even come close to that because it really wasn't, even for some games that had some graphical setting improvement, it was relatively minor, but in this case, yeah, we can see some pretty transformative stuff. And even outside of ray tracing, we see what Final Fantasy Rebirth looks like, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth with PSSR, night and day difference. Looks really blurry to now suddenly, crystal clear. I mean, that's pretty cool, right? So we're going to see better ABs. We're going to see more performance improvements. We're going to, we're not CPU bound the same, and we have dynamic resolution scaling and unlock frame rates already as a thing in VRR. Guys, PS5 Pro is going to be legit. Does that mean that you should run out and get one? No. Of course, everyone is talking about how expensive it is. And a lot of people have pointed out to me on various forums that it is even more expensive overseas. I think in Japan, the equivalent price is literally well over $1,000. In the EU, the equivalent, the PS5 Pro is literally 2x the price of the base PS5. So no, this console is not for everyone. I've said that before. I lost my people, but it's cool. But this console is not for everybody. You should not just run out and get it. This is for people who have a discerning eye, who cares about graphics, who cares about performance, who looks at the base PS5 and some of the more stressful games and just say the performance mode is not stable and that bothers them, or the image quality is just so poor or so blurry because the resolution has to come down so low for it to run, effectively, that kind of stuff. People that care about that stuff, that's who the PS5 Pro is for. And also, you need to have the right TV to take advantage of it. If you really want to get the best out of PS5 Pro, you want to have a relatively large screen a relatively modern TV, 4K TV at least, right? That has 120 hertz support, that has VRR support. That's what you really want. If you're playing on a 42-inch 5-year-old TV, no, right? You don't have to run out and get it. It's probably not going to be that big of a deal for you. But if you're playing on a 75, 77-inch OLED or bigger, that has 120, hertz support, that has VRR support, yes, those, just the devil is in the details. Those minute, sharper images, more clean, more 4K like image on your nice big 4K screen. That's where the benefit comes in. And don't forget, PS5 Pro does unlock an 8K mode, 8K support, right? If you hook it up to an 8K TV, it will show in 8K. It will show the UI in 8K, all right? And it will unlock certain games that have 8K modes. You can take 8K screenshots, right? If you have an 8K TV. That's not many people now. That's literally less than 2% of people probably playing on PlayStation 5 today. But it's there, and yeah, it may spawn some other companies to start making more 8K TVs again. It may spawn some people to go and buy some of those cheaper 8K TVs that they could buy, maybe. 8K, 8K is not a thing. I don't have 8K TV, right? It's not much of a thing now, and it's still way too expensive to be practical at this point. But it's there. So just keep that in mind. I think it's going to be a bigger deal. It's coming out today. I'll definitely talk more about it once I get mine set up. But hopefully we'll have some time this weekend to check out some games. I have, again, I have an 83-inch OLED TV right now that has HDMI 2.1 and VRR and all that good stuff. So I'll, should be able to, I'm one of the prime targets for what the PS5 Pro is. And I'm looking forward to being able to check it out. Let me know your thoughts. I'll talk more about it, but let me know your thoughts for sure if you happen to check out this video. The other thing I just wanted to point out, guys, like I said, I'm just doing this live, so I don't have to worry about editing. This is raw. But I do have some home theater stuff coming, things that I plan to talk about, things that I think you guys, if you like the content I put on the channel before, will be interesting. I do an annual home theater tour. I want to do that again. It may or may not happen before the actual end of the calendar year, and there are reasons for that. Time is one of them, but there's also maybe some things that I may do that may lead into the early new year. We'll see. But I do have some things going on. And in theory, I mean, in general, I would say this year has been more about filling in the gaps, I'll call it, right? I got a lot of the big core components. I got my new speakers. I got a new amp. I got a nice, top of the line preamp. I got a lot of the core pieces, right? But this is about filling in the gaps to make sure I maximize, those components. So, this was a learning experience for me this year, for sure. Things like, cleaning up my power, getting good power into my system, the cabling, that's been a journey for me. And I'll have a lot more to talk about with that. But I have some stuff there. I have some upgrades there. You saw I got new power conditioner. You saw I also upgraded my Atmos speakers there. So there's stuff there and more to come. Some bigger stuff. I think that there could be some things this year that can really, really be some of the biggest changes and biggest upgrades I have to my system for sure. So stay tuned for that. I do want to get those videos out, but I definitely have it coming. So definitely stay tuned, check it out. Some other interesting home theater news. SVS has released finally a new flagship subwoofer. If you guys haven't heard, it's called the SB17 Ultra Evolution, I believe is the full name. This is interesting, and I wanted to talk about it because, again, this channel is all about my journey to endgame and what does endgame really mean. And I think about that a lot. When I say endgame, a lot of people just kind of scoff. Well, there is no endgame. You're never going to stop. And it's like, well, I challenge that, right? I think that, again, there is no absolute universal endgame. Absolutely not. I think that endgame is different for everybody. It depends on your taste. It depends on your budget. It depends on your space. 20 years ago, when I didn't know much about this stuff, and I was just getting into getting my home theater in the box, my little satellite speakers, I remember I got the Polk satellite, system, and I thought that sounded great at the time. And I remember seeing the Polk flagship speaker at the time was the Polk LSI, right, with the ring radiator tweeter and all that good stuff. And those speakers were like $2,500 at the time, I think, or $2,700, something like that. And I remember like thinking to myself, my gosh, like how could a speaker cost $2,500 or $2,700, right? Like who would pay for that? Like that thing gotta be like blowing, your mind, and your ears are gonna be melting, and it must heat up your food as well, right? And all of this stuff. Like I just thought that was insane, but I just admired those speakers. I would see them in the store and I'd be like, wow, like that's something, right? Like that's just like the ultimate, that's the pinnacle. So at that time, based on the knowledge I had, based on the budget I had, being a relatively young, fresh out of undergrad at the time, right? Um, Getting a $2,000 pair of speakers, $25 pair of speakers would have been in game, right? Because they would have been so far beyond what I was used to, right? But I know what you guys are thinking. I would have got that, maybe enjoyed it for a few years, then realized that, oh, there are speakers out there that cost $10,000, $50,000, $1,000,000. There's a lot more out there, right? And I'm, would get the upgrade bug and want to go beyond that. You're absolutely right. But here's the thing: in game is about knowledge of self and discipline. It's about knowing what you want and about having the discipline to commit to that. Okay. So if you know what's out there and you know what you can afford and you know what you're willing to spend and whatever, but if you know the full gamut of what's out there, you know the full runway, and you get to the end of the runway and you've seen that and heard that or seen that or whatever, now you're educated. Now you can make educated decisions and say, well, this is what I want and this is what I don't want, right? That kind of thing. And if, with that education, with that knowledge, you can make an educated guess of where your end game is, right? When that talked about the Polk, that wasn't educated. I didn't know better, right? But if you guys have followed my channel, you've heard over the last few years, what have I been doing? I have been researching, right? In the time since the Paradigm Persona speakers came out back in 2016-ish, I've gone to listen to every speaker in the Paradigm Persona line. I have gone and listened to almost every major speaker brand you can think of. I have gone to boutiques everywhere I lived, when I was in Oregon, in the Portland area, now in the Maryland area, the New Jersey area. I've gone to pretty much all the major stores and boutiques to check out whatever inventory they have, to do listening tests, to talk to the people there. I have gone to shows. You guys have seen this. I've gone to Capital Audio Fest, which, by the way, is coming up again this weekend. And I am going to Capital Audio Fest this weekend, this Saturday. So I will be there with my now newly enlightened ears to really hear, again, what's out there, compare that to my system, and just kind of gauge stuff where I'm at. But I will be there this weekend, so stay tuned for that. But I've listened to everything. I can honestly say, like, I've heard speakers that cost $1 million. I've heard speakers that cost $500,000. I've heard speakers that cost $50,000. I've heard competitors in the price range of the Paradigm Personas. I've heard new companies, new brands, right? Per Listens and right, Focal, Wilson Audio, and Dine Audio, and I mean everything, Esoteric, Cora Acoustics, even the smaller brands, the Dale, right? The Dale Core and all that stuff. I mean, I've heard a lot. You've seen it on my channel. Sorry guys, gotta get in the call. Everything's happening. Of course, doing a lot. But at the Capital Audio Fest at Estonia, which I went to last year, I've heard it all. So I can feel comfortable in saying, when I know what the Persona 7F can do in my space for my use case, and I know that there's other stuff out there, and I've heard them, and I know why those are not the choices for me. That doesn't mean that the Persona 7Fs sound better than everything else out there necessarily, or look better than everything else out there, or is a better value than everything else out there necessarily. But for my use case and for my ears, they work. They're what I want and what I need, right? So I can say that they are comfortably in game. Again, keep in mind that I kept the other speakers, my studios, for 15 years, right? Even when I had more means, even when other stuff was going on, And a couple of times I thought about it, like, oh, could I get more speakers? And I'm just like, yeah, I just wanted something that really felt like a meaningful upgrade for in every aspect, and I didn't feel like I had that there. I found that, and why would I not do that when I'm already at this level? There really isn't a whole lot more that's going to be much better than a paradigm persona, for example, right? So again, it's about knowing what I want. Now, when I talked about in game, I specifically called out the fact that my subwoofers were not in game, right? The SVS SB16 Ultras or were their flagships, and SVS makes really good subs and great value subs, but they weren't in game in the context of, would I not look at other subs in some cases in this price range or direct competitors or beyond and say, well, there's a meaningful improvement I can get out of there? No. I knew there were other subs that can give me meaningful improvements, give me a lot more output. If I were to be in a much bigger space or have a dedicated home theater room, that I can go further with for sure. That said, the SB16s are still great and they serve me well in my space. I have two of them, and these are beasts of subwoofers. And I don't have them up anywhere near the maximum that they can go. And when I do get a chance, that's what the problem. I don't really get a chance to do that often. But when I do get a chance to really push them, they can shake my house and give me more than adequate bass. So I don't really feel like a need to upgrade, although I know there are other stuff out there. But what's interesting about the new SBS subs is when you look at the whole picture, think about this, right? So these subs just came out. They actually, I think, released in October. Now, as of October, SVS had a time period of about 9 years between the previous flagship, SB16 Ultra, and these. Now, if you put that in perspective, before that, SVS was updating their subs like every 2 to 3 years, right? The SB13 Ultra was the previous flagship before that. And there was a gap of like what, maybe 4 or 5 years between the SB13 Ultra, which I had, and then the SB16 Ultras coming out. The fact that it took them 9 years to release a new flagship says a lot about diminishing returns, for one, and just how good the SB16 Ultras were or are. It took them that long to be able to find a product that they felt was a meaningful improvement on there. And it's a lot longer than it used to take before. That to me, and again, that talks about diminishing returns, but it also speaks to the fact that, yeah, I'm kind of getting at the near the end game, right? Because, and that's not the only place you see that. Like, there's a lot of time when you're like, when it takes, like, again, the paradigm persona speakers initially came out, or initially they were shown and unveiled as a concept speaker back in 2015. We're about to hit 2025. It's been 10 years, right? Now, typically companies don't update flagship speakers costing that much. That often. I get it. But 10 years, if you go back and look at Paradigm's history, we saw the Signature series, Signature V1, V2, V3, right? The gap between the V1 and the V3, so 3 speaker updates in that series. That period of gap was smaller than what we've already seen as the run for the Paradigm personas. Right. So, and I've talked to Paradigm. I've been to these shows. I've seen their reps, and I've talked to them. And it's like they kind of said, like, well, they're working on something, of course, and they probably, maybe as early as next year they'll have a new flagship model. But they kind of said, like, we put everything we could into the persona line. Really, there's not a whole lot more room for improvement. Right. Right. And they're probably right. Whatever they come up with, it's either going to be a lot more expensive, or it's going to be a fairly marginal, upgrade, I would say. And we see that in a lot of other brands when they have their updates and upgrades. Yeah, there's some improvements, and depending on your level of equipment, you might be able to hear the difference. And for example, looking at something like the Bowers and Wilkins Signature Diamond, right? It's still a 800 Diamond D4 level speaker, but they made a lot of improvements under the hood for the Signature series. And guess what? The speaker now went from being a roughly $30,000 to now being $50,000 for this limited run edition. And it looks the same, and it sounds a little, I've heard it, it sounds a little different, but again, it's not like a night and day thing. It's not like it's a whole new generation of speaker. It's kind of just an evolutionary, polishing of certain aspects, and it is improved for sure, but it's not like a dramatic thing for sure. And I think that's what I'm saying. You get to this level, diminishing returns become real, and that's kind of what you see a lot, right? And so when I talk about in game, again, knowing for what I want and what my budget is, that's what I mean. And having the discipline to say, look, I committed to this. I did my homework. I know what else is out there and I know what this is, right? And I don't need or want those things, and I know why. I know why those things aren't necessarily right for me, and it could be a bunch of reasons. With speakers, it's not all about sound quality. It could be things like the size of the speakers in some cases, right? It could be the use case, like I talked about before. I wanted something that can be really good at home theater and really good for music. There are a lot of speakers that you can argue that are really good at music, better than a Persona, but they don't really have much of a home theater solution. Like literally, they only make a 2-channel version of that speaker. How do I get a matching center? How do I get a cohesive, 7.1 sound? You can't for a lot of those speakers, right? So there's other considerations, right? But I know what it is. So when I look at the SB17, I don't feel any real, urge to upgrade, right? I don't, right? It's just I'm not saying that they don't sound better. What I do see from the specs is that they addressed probably the biggest weakness with the SP16 Ultras, which is the amp. Right, that subwoofer was amplifier limited. The previous amplifier in there was 1500 watts, and with that driver, you can push it. And when you start hitting the limits, the driver can handle it, but the amplifier starts kind of shutting stuff down. So the new SP17, it's only 1 inch bigger. It's not a much bigger cone. SPS wanted to keep the form factor roughly the same because they like the size of the speakers to be able to fit in more homes and more rooms, and that's great. So there's not a big change there. It is just a matter of the amplifier now going from 1500 watts up to 2800 watts, almost twice the amplifier capacity. That's what they needed to do, right? And being able to fit that and work within that size with that cone, and then getting this brand new DSP to handle the actual the digital signal processor. That's what the DSP stands for. So that's handling like the software around the amplifier, controlling the amplifier, and how it actually handles the output, stuff like that. They've done a lot of work to make that more sophisticated, and the result is you're going to get a lot more output, right? It's going to be stronger, more output. You're going to be able to get more usable output at lower frequencies as well, that kind of stuff. Again, I'm not using the capacity of my SP16s. And if you look at the specs aren't dramatically better, to be honest, on paper. I am sure that if you heard them side by side, you will hear more output, more fullness from the SP17, no question. But is it something to really feel like I need to upgrade to? Not really, not now, not in this space. So I look forward to hearing them at some point. But it's just interesting because previously, whatever subwoofer I had, if some company came out with a new subwoofer, I immediately was like, oh, I can clearly see why that subwoofer is better than what I have. That's my point, right? Like, I may not be able to upgrade because of finance reasons, because of space reasons or whatever, but I'm like, well, I know that that's better. It would be awesome if I can get that, that's going to be something that's clearly better. And, end game to me doesn't mean that there's nothing better, but it means that kind of thinking, that kind of feeling starts to go away. And I'm already feeling that, right? Like there really is not much more that I can do in a lot of aspects of my system. So again, I've heard speakers that cost 5 times the price of my speakers now. And I know, there's a use case for that. Not in my space, not for the size, not for the aesthetics, not for the, like I said, the gaming use case and home theater, whatever. But there's a use case for that. And I can see why those speakers will be better, they're bigger or whatever, they're going to put out a much bigger sound, much more sophisticated sound if you have the equipment surrounding it to take advantage of it and all that good stuff. Do I feel a real urge or need to be like, man, I know that's so much better than what I have. Like one day I need to start saving now. No, I felt that for so long, right? But no, I don't really feel that now for a lot of things, and that's kind of what I felt for the subwoofer. My biggest interesting thing was like, I saw it and I was like, that's what they did. And I'm looking at it and looking at the specs, and like, it looks about the same. Literally the specs is 1 hertz lower, like the frequency response. I didn't see the full like CEA output, for the frequency curve in terms of output. Again, I'm sure it's higher, but is that like, oh my gosh, you got to run out and get that? No. And I don't even think SPS would say that. They said it even in their release stuff. They're like, oh, the SP16s are still great, but these are better, right? if you want, or if you're just coming in to SPS ecosystem, these are going to do it. Their goal is to make sure that those subwoofers compete with what has been perceived as the best subwoofers in its class. So that would be things like the JTR RS1, for example, right? The sealed sub from JTR, right? That's the 18-inch sub. But that sub, was consistently considered, oh, that sub is going to spank the SVSs, right? So this sub, when you see the numbers, I'm pretty sure it's going to be pretty darn close to what the JTR can do. And they're roughly in the same ballpark of price. That's the other thing. The SVS did all of this and basically didn't increase the price that much, which is awesome. So it's still a good value for sure. Even looking at something like the single driver per listen, like even like the D15, for example, that D15 is like what, $6,000, right? That's like almost 3 times the price of the SVS. But if you look at the specs and look at what it can do, SVS is trying to say like it's going to be up there. It's going to be able to compete with it in terms of output. It's going to the amplifier now, 2,800 watts, is actually more than what you get in that $6,000 per listen sub. Now, there's other aspects to that. The DSP in per listen is awesome. That's why you got such low distortion and all that kind of good stuff. But again, SBS invested in their DSP, and they're saying like, again, low distortion, lots of output, great sound quality, et cetera, et cetera. We got to see what the measurements say. But knowing SVS, they're trying to compete with just about every single sub flagship out there. Anything under $10,000 at least. And it's hard to think that they would do that, but I think they would be competitive. And again, it would be a great value prop for a lot of cases. Something like the Fathom, the JL Audio. Yeah, we know the Fathom is great. Fathom is $5,000 for a 13-inch, right? So you can get a 17-inch sub with similar output now for half the price. You can get 2 of them for SVS, right? For the same price as one Fathom, right? So now that kind of starts to come into play in their thinking. That's what they're hoping for, at least. But it's interesting that it took 9 years for them to come to that point. It's interesting that it's taken Paradigm 10 years to come up with a meaningful flagship beyond what the current persona is. It's interesting that even something like the Anthem AVM90 is also now been on the market for about 5 years, 4 or 5 years, 5 years. Right. And, again, still perfectly viable. Right. There's no talk of any follow up to that yet. So that's where diminishing returns. That's where you start kind of feeling like this is why I say in game, because I don't really need to, spend more to get more. It's not much more to get. That's what I mean by that. Right. So a lot more to come with that. I think, I'm looking forward to hearing SVS subs. But a lot more discussion about in game. I do feel like I'm getting closer. I've done a lot this year to fill in those gaps. I have some more ideas and maybe to really complete out my end game. And what that means is in this space for now, if I never upgrade anything else, I am good and I would feel like I'm getting a superior, supreme experience. That's what I mean. If I move to a whole nother space, I need to cater to that space. And maybe there's some other decisions I can make for that. But I feel by and large, like the move will be lateral in that space. That's what I mean by endgame. So anyway, check out more home theater stuff to come, hopefully before the end of this year. You guys definitely will be excited about it. PS5 Pro Day. My Pro is still not here, but it should be here any minute now. I'm expecting it within the next hour or so. I will be checking it out this weekend. I probably will have at least some impressions, some more thoughts about that from my perspective, hopefully soonish, maybe next week or sometime in the next week or two. But anyway, hopefully you guys check this out. Hopefully this check-in was somewhat meaningful. Please like, subscribe to the channel. Please comment on this video. Some people came in. I know you guys saw it, but throw me some comments, man. Check me out. Let me know what other things are happening that you want me to talk about. Besides the Pro, besides, again, some of these new home theater products. I definitely can give you some more impressions of CAF, Capital Audio Fest, coming up this weekend. I will be there again. So that should be exciting for the home theater audience for sure. But let me know what things you guys want to hear. If this live format works, I can definitely, kind of maybe advertise it or do kind of more of a dedicated time in the future. But this is just to kind of help me get something out there faster to you guys without me having to worry about editing and all that kind of good stuff, because there is a lot happening. So let me know if you got the Pro, what you think of it. And till next time, I will talk to you guys later. Thanks a lot. Peace out, guys. Yes, hold on. I know I'm still live. I was just trying to see. I just realized that I do have a comment here that I don't know why it's not coming up. Um, I can't even see it. It's really weird. I can see some of it, but I can't see the full thing on the my chat right here. Why is it doing that? That's really weird. Interesting. Um, well, I think it says Jay's Wade. I have seen you on the channel. Appreciate it. I can't. It won't show me your full comment. It's really weird. I was just trying to give you a shout out, man, before I got off here. But okay. Anyway, I don't know. Can't get it right now. But yeah, we'll talk to you guys later. Appreciate it. Bye.